South Africa is struggling to adapt to some of the toughest restrictions in the world as it enters day 2 of its 21-day lockdown.
Lockdown was, at the beginning, very confusing.
So I lived, in apartheid. The level of violence and oppression and how the police were engaging with people who were breaking lockdown rules was very reminiscent and triggering from where I came from.
It was painful, it was uncomfortable.
I was seeing a looming disaster.
There's always pressure around you and you don't really know what to do.
Finance, the system, things just don't work anymore.
I did feel afraid.
People are rightfully scared. They're right to be scared.
This is not the world I imagined at the beginning of the year.
"2019 was a very rough year for me and my family because we lost our little girl. So then came 2020, things started turning around.
For the first time in a couple of years, I had a lot of hope for this year.
This would be the year that I would start finding someone to date and fall in love with. That obviously has not happened so far.
I was supposed to have a good year, I won't lie. I was supposed to have a good year.
I was just crashing and burning towards the end of 2019. And as I got into 2020, I think for I wouldn't say the first time, but one of the few occasions in my life where I thought this new year is actually a marker.
Before COVID-19 arrived, we had old world plans.
I was getting clients right, left and center. I was planning big.
2020 was going to be a massive year for us. We were expanding quite big.
We really wanted to expand after, working so hard in 2019 to raise the funds.
I was thinking that maybe this would be a year for me to actually buy an asset.
And so I started the year as though it was a new start and a new beginning.
And that's what the hope was, that this would be the year that you would turn the corner.
COVID happened and everything came to a screeching halt.
The National Coronavirus Command Council has decided to enforce a nationwide lockdown for 21 days with effect from midnight on Thursday, the 26th of March.
Wow, this is a tough situation. What do you choose between people's livelihoods, people's health as a country?
We didn't know what was going to happen, but I just had a feeling that this was not going to go well.
Sort of reminds me of 9/11. I remember watching 9/11 when it happened. And I never forget watching the first plane going in and then the second plane came. And I think I sat up all night and watched it in complete disbelief, but never realizing what effect 9/11 was going to have on me.
Who would have thought in this day and age that every single higher education institution would have been shut down at the same time? Who would have thought shops, countries across the world would have just shut down?
I worked really hard to keep my finger on the pulse or the many pulses. When COVID hit, I lost that sense.
I mean, come on, we sound like we are in a movie. It's actually not even like the movies that I've watched, Apocalypse and stuff. They don't stay in that space. There's at least hope, change, and everyone gets out of this. But we just in it.
It feels like we've had a giant pause button that's just been hit. As everything slowed down, you can really see it for what it is.
This COVID-19 thing, it's changing everything.
It's had a lot of ups and downs. I think that in the beginning of the pandemic, it was in planning mode and strategic mode and kind of go, go, go mode. And I think in the beginning, we were functioning almost in a robotic way to get all of those systems in place.
I can't say that it's here or it's for me, it's for everyone. Some people lose parents, both parents from this COVID-19. So it's not easy. Life is difficult,
There was one particular day in ICU which was very bad across all the units, and with all of our referrals, we had 7 deaths in total in one day, which is unheard of in the normal ICU setting in our institution.
I think from a family perspective, my sister had COVID, but I think that also made me wake up to the fact that this disease is not just something that happens to other people, but it gets closer to you.
One minute everything's okay, and then next minute you hear someone's being diagnosed, and then on the very same day, a family member passed away, and then we're still kind of processing family members being hospitalized with COVID.
When I say health, I think death in this period, and that's alarming. It's very tiring for 110 days to feel like you could kill someone by shaking their hand.
The fragility of our health and the possibility of becoming unwell has become a really stark reality for us.
It's not just a statistic that's out there, but really something that hits home.
There was one patient in particular that I think she will walk with me for the rest of my career. I spoke to her just before she was intubated, and she was very fearful, and she didn't want to be intubated, or she was scared of being intubated, and promised her that I would look after her. And she was my age, and she had 3 small kids. And after a week of looking after her, she didn't make it. And I think that was probably the hardest one for me. And that was a really, really difficult day.
I'm sure there's a rush for insurance now. Everyone has lived on the brink of thinking, tomorrow I can die. Literally, that's how we are living with so much fear.
But I do understand that this is going to, just as much as it's changing our paradigm, it's going to change the insurance world's paradigm completely too.
I had this conversation with my sister, actually. She said, I have to get life insurance for myself and my husband because I've got asthma. My husband's not great. He's like 46. We could die. Then what happens to our kids? She's like, no, I have to get insurance right now. And that is the knee-jerk reaction to trying to have control in a situation where you really don't have control. So whoop-de-doo to insurance companies if they have the right products, that actually helps people like that.
Most of my mom's side of the family are in the health department. My sister-in-law is a doctor. So the conversations were, if you get sick and you have to go to hospital, you will be allocated a bed. Where it will be is not up to you. You are not going to go to a nice private hospital and, be comfortable and things.
My insurance also phoned me and told me that I must add some money for this COVID thing. I said, I don't have money. I can't. I'm not working regularly. I'm at home. So how can you increase the premium? They said that because of this COVID, they want to benefit, always they want to benefit from us. They don't think of us that we are not working anymore.
Healthcare and all those things are basic human rights. And we've kind of conditioned ourselves that they are something we can buy into. So we've been paying for something that should be a basic human right.
And it doesn't matter, you're rich, you're poor, you're beautiful, you're ugly, you die.
After initially controlling the virus, South Africa is experiencing a sharp rise in coronavirus cases, currently more than 10,000 new cases a day.
I think, especially at the start, some people who probably seem to be callous were asking questions around, can you really just shut down the economy to save a few people's lives?
It's a paradigm shift, the whole thing. And there are terrible parts of it. The loss of life is devastating. The loss of livelihood is devastating. And I think a lot of people have tried to separate those two things out. And a lot of people have tried to put one against the other. You're either in the camp of trying to save lives or you're in the camp of trying to save the economy. And I don't think you can separate those two things out at all. They are equally devastating.
This is where we need to start waking up. It's like you can't take Wuhan and cookie cutter and put it down. You can't take the UK and Britain's response to COVID. You can't even take, Tanzanians' response to COVID. You need to look at South Africa. And you need to say, what is here that is an opportunity for us?
Once I got past my personal fears and making sure the children were okay, and once all of that sort of settled, then I realized now we have a business problem, and it's a big problem.
I went from being very, very comfortable and confident in the amount of work coming my way to nothing coming in.
1 minute you have a good job, and the next minute you're hungry.
There comes a time you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself as well and try and save our businesses, because without those businesses, then all these jobs that we've created disappear.
I think a lot of young men and women who have been pushed back to rural areas by the lockdown are not going to make their way back. I'm talking as someone who lives in Johannesburg, I've got a house in Limpopo, so I know a lot of people who could not afford to pay rent yet during the lockdown, they are gone.
Mom, dad, siblings are losing jobs, so the little bit of money that they are earning that was for themselves 4 months ago is now supporting a family. They can't afford rent anymore, so they're moving back home. This messes around with your head, big time.
Selling my furniture, selling my upright fridges, parting with my beautiful vintage pieces in my shop, packing up everything. It has been very hard.
I've lost a business in Australia, and you don't just lose, the materialistic things and the money and the business and the whole thing. You lose your confidence, and you lose your meaning. Like you've got nothing to get up for in the morning. Your ambition is gone. You can't think straight. You can't think about a plate of food, or you can't see light at the end of the tunnel. And if you don't have family and you don't have friends, and you're struggling with health and mental health, you're in serious trouble. You're in serious trouble.
There's a notion of, especially in the older generation of South Africa, that the job permanency is still this safety net, safety blanket, and we've seen now again with through COVID that it's not so for everybody.
But I can see it in my staff on a daily basis. They're not feeling secure anymore. They're very insecure. They don't know if they're going to have a job in 6 weeks' time.
Financially, it is devastating. And, even for a while, some of us, have husbands who might keep us alive a little bit. But there've been 2 salaried people, and now there is 1 salaried people. And so now it's kind of like this triage of like, do we keep the van? Do we let go of the van? Do we pay this insurance? Do we reduce this thing? What do we do about our life savings? If we have any, they're very tough questions about how to go forward, how to consolidate our debt,
I wanted COVID to be a person to come into the room, and I wanted to blossom the daylights out of this character, because I was like, how dare you take away everything I was worked so hard for?
There's been a lot of talk about, institutions coming to the party, but not actually coming to the party.
The small business development department, they've put aside funding for entrepreneurs. The first problem is that it's a loan basis, which I think is very unfair on entrepreneurs, because now they have this loan that they're going to have to repay, and they don't even know if they're going to be in existence in the next couple of months.
At the end of the day, the kind of support surprised me in that I felt that it put a lot of emphasis on business owners taking on a lot of additional debt.
We've not had huge debt, but now we have debt. How do we start something new without capital?
There was this whole thing about banks have to be more lenient. Banks are going to give some holidays here and there, but banks are not going to forget your debt. They're also businesses that look at their bottom line, and they are more interested in the bottom line. There is no charity in banking.
And we are sort of bound to the system of money, whether we like it or not. We can be good about growing our vegetables and so forth,
But still, money is going to play a role.
And the opportunity that's there for the financial services sector to tune into what are the actual needs that's there. And in meeting those needs, how do we create a contribution that allows people to become more active? But the sector doesn't do that. The sector says, well, there's no opportunity there. The opportunity is in the top to the middle part of that pyramid. So let's target ourselves there. And that's like dancing with yourself all night long and saying, I had a wonderful time.
And then we're going to have more lip service talking about, entrepreneurs, they're the engine of our economy and we need to get them to work. And it's like when it mattered, you didn't do what was meant, to be done to help these entrepreneurs.
And so when COVID happens and we see this chasm in societies across the world, I mean, looking at who is it that hasn't pitched up? Well, I think that the financial services sector needs to look at itself very deeply there.
I think a lot of us were passive. We're passive participants to world affairs. We're passive participants to what is happening within our own country. But I think it's time that we sort of become active in fighting for everybody.
Kind of had these two really impactful things happening. The pandemic on the one hand, a very kind of existential crisis for humankind as a whole, and then the Black Lives Matter movement, which was really about putting history into a kind of contemporary perspective as well.
The gender-based violence in South Africa, the Black Lives Matter movement all over, and what's happening in America, it's been such a horrendously painful time to be a woman, to be Black, to be queer, and just super uncomfortable, I must admit.
And so now you're seeing all over the world a rise of citizen activism. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the promises that many governments had are now becoming glaringly impossible to fulfill. It's becoming very clear now, I think, to many societies what utter nonsense that is, and sadly how it was never true to start off with.
It's a very interesting to watch, particularly now, because now has the makings of a massive revolution. It can be good, can be bad. I mean, but all the ingredients are there, worldwide. The masses are revolting.
After this government, I think it will struggle a lot to convince people about a lot of things, and we're going to see more of agency coming up.
The Black Lives Matter movement, it comes with a lot of responsibility for people in a position of white privilege, and just privilege in general, especially in South Africa when we do have such an incredible disparity in wealth.
There are all these moments. We are in an incredible period in history right now. There are all these moments of thinking and reflecting.
This is not the last pandemic that we're going to have. I think we're going to have more of these pandemics. What's going to happen in the future if we don't set this kind of foundation?
I think that in going to the new world, people must ask themselves these questions. If you have been investing in a system for a long time and hoping that that system would be there for you when you most need it, and suddenly it's not there, do you continue investing blindly into that system, or must something about the system be changed so that it doesn't happen again?
The institutions seem to run everything. You complied with how things were going to move forward. So I'm actually also demanding or rejecting, because it seems to me like everybody's on shaky ground. There's no point in me complying fully with external systems. I need to create those for myself. I need to say what they need to be. And at this point, I think people are more willing to build something new by taking sort of action.
This virus thing changed everything, and our mentality is also changed.
Before that, the illusions that we had have been shattered, and the blasé approach to issues has been shattered.
I think one of the things, certainly for me, that's changed is that I'm demanding so much more from any organisation. Anyone I'm going to be parting my money with, I'm demanding so much more from them.
It's been probably one of the biggest societal re-engineering phases or processes we've seen since the World Wars.
At first, before the lockdown, everything was going smoothly. You didn't notice. You see, like you're driving past the N2 and you see shacks on the side and you're like, okay, it's just normal. It's just normal vibes. Everybody's doing fine. That's normal. But now you actually see how those people are actually not fine. Now their struggles are actually being highlighted even way more than they were. It's actually being put out. It's like at first we just used to see the tip. Now we see the whole mountain, and it's crazy. It's sad. It's inhumane.
What became like sort of patently evident is the pain, the anguish, the very evident divisions that we live with every day. You know, incredible wealth, incredible poverty, incredible beauty, incredible pain. It was all kind of becoming really palpable and we could really feel it. And it was really like an uncovering, like an apocalyptic uncovering.
For the first time, the informal economy, it's now coming to bear right in front of our eyes in a way that we cannot avoid it. The poor have been vulnerable from day one. People who are doing well, they can survive for a long time. A poor person who lives from hand to mouth, each and every, when they end today, it is for the food for today. So for them, it became an instant humanitarian crisis.
The vast majority here have lost their jobs.
So if there's no food, we have to go look for food. It's hunger, it's not about corona now, because you need to survive.
The repercussions in the economy that we are incapable of calculating now are going to be so severe. We are going to be confronted with the picture of the decimation of the livelihood in the informal economy. We are going to start realizing the forward and the backward linkages between the formal and this informal economy that actually we just didn't know how many of our people lived in this informal economy of just waking up and trying.
I think there has been a recognition for a granularization of insights. That's been coming for a while, in fact, particularly with less granular metrics like, you know, GDP, for example, is a metric of progress in society. That's such a macro view that it often tells you nothing about what's happening.
I think we're about to find out a lot about the unknowables of our economy that we have existed with as the unknowables. They are just about to become the knowables now.
Inequality has always been there, and if you looked for it, you didn't have to look very hard. What COVID's done is it's allowed for people who have had their heads buried in the sand to see like the way in which we live in these two economies and the way in which these economies have actually been at the mercy of what COVID-19 is bringing up.
I think there's a lot of greed that has created these gaps where the have-nots are so many and those that have are so few. And in between, nobody's doing anything.
If this time has kind of shown anything, then it is just how unequal our country is and how unequal the world is. And in the same way as we are being presented with a huge health crisis, and as a consequence, we are being confronted with the existential crisis of inequality.
It has also shown some of the things that we had shoved under the carpet. And I think the biggest one is the issue of racism. And another one that is really, really, hits me every time is gender-based violence.
There's definitely not just a huge rise towards racism and everything leftist, but also Afrophobia, xenophobia. All of those things are heightening in South Africa, heightening in America, just heightening everywhere.
Prior to this, the whole fickleness is people just pretended that it wasn't there, it's not my problem. And so when you deal with an infectious disease, your problem is my problem.
We are all safe potentially only when we are all feeling secure financially, when we all have jobs, when we all are feeling like we have a future.
If one is suffering, we're all going to suffer. And that for me has been quite clear from the whole COVID experience, is because while you might have a job, most people didn't. And I think that COVID has really helped people open their hearts to realizing the fact that if we're not all going to progress together, it's going to suck progressing alone.
We can't leave no one behind. you are as rich as the poorest person in this country.
My work is interactive, so it needs me in the room, the actual space. And so everything came to a halt, and there was this eerie silence in my life suddenly like filled up with like kids bickering and like kids homeschooling, which that was the other change. With schools closing, suddenly I went from being this person who was constantly moving to being stuck in one place, only using the internet and having my kids at home, and so also having to become a teacher.
Look, it's been a struggle as well. We've got the dog, we've got the kid. All of a sudden, it's homeschooling on top of the work that we're already doing. My wife is a teacher, so you can see some of the planning behind me.
So I find that like a lot of my multi-layered identities is what I'm really struggling with in the lockdown. How do you skip to different identities in one space? So when people have sort of shut us down in our little spaces, that space at home then allows for you to have to deal with those multiple identities in that one space.
The idea of not being able to switch the difference between work and home, I think, has become a big struggle for a lot of people I try to engage with on a daily basis.
And also not feeling like I'm doing anything really well, just basically like scraping the bottom of the barrel, or maybe doing a 50%.
Essentially, COVID and lockdown were the disruption, and that just lended itself to rapid adoption of new technology.
One of the amazing things about this crisis is that there are a bunch of things that before, for example, he referred to universities moving online, that would have taken years and years and years to make happen. But people wanted to try to do this, but some people didn't want it, some people didn't want it. And all of a sudden, people had to do it in a month. You had to.
So working remotely, I struggled in the beginning. I felt so uncomfortable. I hated it. I felt like I was in meetings all the time. I couldn't get my pacing right. I couldn't keep my energy right. And I've now gotten much better at it. I don't sort of allow myself to just sink into that kind of, that inert, panicky space.
You've got big corporates that have all of a sudden got this disparate audience of employees that are all working from home, some effectively, some not so. But they still need to be in the know.
I was one of those like aunties. I was like, Zoom cannot even come close to the magic that I can do in a room. And let's be clear, like no online platform can replace the magic of having beautiful souls in a room. Like, I don't care what anyone says. Like, you can't replicate that ever with any system. But I was so delightfully surprised by how Zoom has got different functionalities that can make any online space really interactive and engaging.
I do believe that we've all found out that we do not need to be in the same room with someone to do business with them or to connect with them or to learn from them. We can do it through so many different platforms.
I spoke to my mentor recently and I was saying to her, do you know you can do this on Zoom and you can do that? And she was like, listen to you speak, like you've become an ambassador almost for Zoom. Whereas, at the start, I was sort of digging my heels in.
I must say one of the interesting things has been how much more work and meetings I'm having to contend with than before.
We had to do an 8-hour strategy session a few weeks ago. And I must say by hour 7, I was like a fidgety child. I was disruptive. I was just bad-tempered. I was totally unable to stay with it. So I'm going to recommend we don't do that again.
Because you're not having to travel or they're not having to travel to see you, they can just start doing as many video conferences as possible. So my diary looks like a bit of a mess.
I think health and wellness comes from a different space. Being able to turn off a computer at a certain time, not working to endless hours because your home office is also at home and you don't have that dividing line. I think it's very important.
Some companies that are in South Africa that are seriously investigating a permanent work from home environment. So possibly this could be the way that it goes for many, many people in corporates across South Africa.
And of course, that also comes with things like Wi-Fi. You must have internet
at your house. Otherwise, if you don't have internet, then you won't be able to work.
I think the massive disruption to Vodacom, MTN, the digital, the people who hold the gates around what does data really mean for our lives and Wi-Fi, and why do we need, to hemorrhage money or pay in half our salary for data just to get access.
The recent school closing has made it so evident. So my kids are at an independent school, so they continue to work. And I'm just very aware that there's some kids who haven't learned anything since March. So what happens to them this last year?
We've seen this rapid rise in digitization. Of course, there are some risks associated with that, including a rise in inequality, especially between the digitally privileged, the digital elite on the one hand, and the digitally deprived on the other.
But if people don't understand that digital technology and access to internet and connectivity is blocking people from being part of an economy, being part of a future, then we need to disrupt those spaces. We really need to think about what is this whole idea that Wi-Fi can only be for some.
Where we had a digital divide before, we have an abyss now.
People are trying so hard to use the remedies government said we must use. But the only thing I noticed from the shops, the price is up and we cannot afford it. One of these days I went to ShopRite to buy a lemon. It was 15 rand, a small lemon, 15 rand. And for me, for them it's a business. But what about the poor people? Why they don't think of poor people?
I think I've become a lot more proactive about my health and not wanting to give the power for my health to outside companies like the GP and the pharmaceuticals. I've seen how being conscious of what we eat and what we consume during the day has had a direct impact.
I've become obsessed with YouCook, and YouCook is teaching me how to cook. I'm better at it now, even when I don't have one of their recipes. And that is shifting my relationship with food, my relationship with self-nurturing. I never used to be able to cook for myself.
I've also been surprised at how much I can eat in a day. The fridge doesn't want to see me anymore. It's pure habit. It's no longer fuel or nutrition. It's habit. I don't need another licorice sweet, but hey, babe, I am again at the tin eating more sugar.
I even baked a carrot cake the other day. Apparently it was delicious. I think there's more bakers and cooks that have emerged in this time.
I guess there's also been just a cultural change as well in how we perceive food, for example, which has been very interesting. We've seen a lot of market types of approaches where it's farm to table.
People will really start supporting local, buying from the little guy in the corner, even if we have to pay a little bit more for it. I think people will do that to support local. I think that's going to become huge.
People want their food organic. People want their food fresh. So it's almost like we're going back to a more simpler way of living.
Farmers are amazing people, but commercial farming is not an amazing practice. And unfortunately, this country has been built like that. It's along the American model where you get big commercial farmers, and if they can save money and spray something with clear phosphate to get it ripe the next morning so that the pickers can come in, which you can understand, but we have to find better ways. We really do.
The COVID pandemic has also kind of highlighted the food security issues we do have within some parts of the world, and pushing us as civilization to going back to the basics of growing our own food or getting food from an urban farm in the community. And that probably links to also the health perspective of what COVID has really shed light on.
At the end of the day, I think that we will appreciate the little things every single day more than we did 4 months ago.
There is an appreciation for the more mundane. That means that there's obviously something in that. One can generate that positivity from such small moments.
Also, when we cook at home, it becomes an opportunity for creativity and initiative and problem solving.
People have started baking, they've started fixing things, they've started making things again, they've started knitting. Old artisan skills that our parents used to do, which I think has actually been quite... It's good to connect to those things. It's good to be able to do something with your hands.
You're sort of doing things yourself, from fixing the table yourself instead of throwing it away, or maybe asking the guy across the road who's got a saw that you can borrow, and then maybe helping him out with something else. It's sort of a really dense, intimate spaces being created that do the same thing of also helping other people using their skills, because one feels that it's a kind of a civic duty or something that's a responsibility for a community. And working in those kind of small, much more sort of almost lo-fi kind of ways. Not so, the ambition is different, but I think the reward is maybe, it certainly replaces the reward of looking outward, but it also rewards you because it's actually something we might have forgotten to do and need to relearn.
COVID has been a big, scary thing on many levels. It's been a devastating thing on many levels, but it's given birth to the most unbelievable creativity and innovation and accelerated it at a pace that we never thought we'd see.
I found that a really encouraging idea, that people have sort of rediscovered their own creativity, even people who used to live in spreadsheets. COVID's really testing resilience in such a wide range of areas. For governments, for businesses, for small businesses, for families and for individuals.
This caught us all by surprise, and we always thought we could control outcomes because we're a generation that never lived through a world war. So we never had our life disrupted on a large scale. And maybe the thought is not to take anything for granted. Don't expect that things will happen a certain way, but really live with an openness to new possibilities.
There's a big theme around it of unlearning and relearning, you know, and that uncomfortable place that it all puts us in, and are we ready to face that?
A big thing about the way we think about the way society has to be is that it consistently, you know, the economy consistently has to grow. It has to grow every single year. And there's this really cool David Attenborough quote where he says, if you believe in infinite growth on a finite planet, you're either crazy or an economist. And this is perhaps, you know, we're having to think about how do we live in a world now where well, you know, we're going to go through some challenges for the next few years as the global economy tries to get back to where it was, but maybe there are opportunities to start doing things a bit differently.
You know, you can only really experiment. Otherwise, it's really quite simple and mechanistic. Simply copy a solution from the past. But we've seen that that no longer works.
You know, the future is uncertain, and I think we have to try not to panic about it and let go of what we always wanted was our security. I think you're going to have to venture out there and be more courageous.
Leaders of the future, and we're starting to see some examples of this, are ones who are unfailingly curious, who are willing to learn. And with learning comes humility. And that's such a tough thing for a leader to really have, and let alone demonstrate.
For a diverse country, a country as diverse as ours, you need the kind of leadership that knows how to bring people together, that knows how to stretch to the left to touch people, stretch to the right and touch other people, make everybody feel that we all belong.
But I think maybe it's time for leaders to trust society, and, you know, it's okay that you don't know. Nobody knows anyway. But that you're at least willing to figure it out, find it out, do some research, see what you can discover, experiment in a safe way.
We are in the trust economy. We've been forced, I think, as a whole world really, to really look at the things that we hold dear and the things that we take for granted. And also the position of others in relation to ourselves within society.
While so many people have been sort of so kind of pulled down by COVID, I'm quite grateful for it. I feel like it redirected me back to where I need to be, that private medicine is not what I want to do, that I am passionate about healthcare in South Africa and that I'm passionate about the people of South Africa, and that I want those people to feel as though the service that they access is a good one. And I don't want the average South African to feel like they're left behind again.
With COVID, there may be an opportunity now for a deeper appreciation of what humans are all about, how we can think of ourselves as resilient, how businesses can be good citizens in such a resilient system, and how governments, rather than attempting to control those systems, can act as agents of resilience.
I'm interested to see that people and corporates and South Africa takes up the opportunity to look at what we've learned and apply it effectively so that we can, we can move on.
Moving beyond resilience to what we've called prosilience. That is not resilience to bring you back to where you were when COVID hit. Because frankly, even then it wasn't working. That you allow yourself for a redesign of sustainable resiliency beyond COVID that can withstand some of what will inevitably be an increased attack on your resiliency.
We all have to decide what we want to remember 2020 for, because it's going to be spoken for many, many decades to come. I decided that I don't want to remember it for a year when I gave up. I want to remember it for a year when I imagined different things.
We need to tell the right stories. We need to be honest about the stories about this time so that we can learn from it.
We're a society that likes instant answers, but I do believe that we'll be looking at this and studying the impact of this for a long time to come. I do believe it will change us profoundly and has already changed us.
The future change is going to come off the back of individual stories, and it's the collective story. You don't necessarily need to agree with their opinions, but their story is their story. And I think that's what's powerful about stories, is that they are, for the most part, from a human perspective, truthful.
I like the idea of re-story because it captures the idea of building a new narrative. And when you build a new narrative, then you have the potential to connect more people.
The story that needs to change is just basically getting back to being human and seeing vulnerability, our own vulnerability and the vulnerability of society, something to be, nursed and cared for.
And so I think as we re-story the world in the life post-COVID, I think we have to be much more tuned into what are the real lived experiences of people across the spectrum of the privileged to the poor, to the destitute.
I think what we've learned from this pandemic is that human relationships are very important. Supporting each other is quite important. I think the new normal, as we're calling it now, requires for us to look at equality as a currency that can drive humanity.
The confrontation of this moment means that history might change. So rather than being depressed by it or not being comfortable with the grayness that this moment kind of conjures, to actually embrace it because of the possibilities that might emerge.
Stories are very important in our lives. They give you a sense of knowing and a sense of, like the story that you're documenting, I was there when that happened.